everybody. My name is Terry. I'm one of the pastors here, and if it's your first time, welcome. We're really excited that you are a part of our church today as we continue a message series entitled Fine Tuning. And let me catch you up to speed. What we're talking about is the idea that every single day of our lives, we're fine-tuning our faith. Maybe you're here today and maybe you don't have any faith. In other words, you don't really know who Jesus is, don't know much about Jesus, and you're just kind of here. We're excited that you've joined us today. Or maybe you've been here for 20 years, 30 years, and you know, in your mind, you think I know a lot about faith. Well, isn't it true that all of us have a turn of the dial, a next step that we need to take? And if we're really fine-tuned into our faith, we really know that we can take that step or that turn today. So if you're here a couple of weeks ago, we kind of put everybody on the spot. We actually introduced 3 chairs, and we said, which chair are you in? And so if you didn't see that message, I invite you to go back, because what we found is that there is the second chair, the middle chair, that is the comfortable chair. It is a chair you don't want to get out of. It's a chair that it flows with culture. It's really great. It's the chair that says, yes, Jesus is wonderful and he's great, but it's the chair that says, I'm in control of my own life and I'll make the most important decisions. That chair that we want to be in, that chair that is a faith-driven chair, that's the one where, man, it's tension-filled. Man, it's pushing against the current. Man, it's just a lot of work. And so we find ourselves really easy slipping back into the second chair, the comfy chair. And then last week we said this, that faith is not necessarily a point, but a dash. And what we kind of remarked on was the idea that when someone asks us about our faith or describe our faith, do we go back to a point, or have we been living our faith out every single day, understanding that it's a journey of faith, that when we talk about our faith, we're talking about what God did today or what God did yesterday, what God did the day before, as opposed to always talking about a point that we hearken back to, which we think was pretty amazing. So no matter where you're at today we're going to talk specifically about that journey that we have, not necessarily with ourselves and God, but with one another. And so it's really, really powerful. I hope that you lean in, because we're probably going to step on some toes today. But let me ask you this question. How many of you, as you are here today, when you think about the idea of church, you think about a building that you drive to as opposed to a people that you join? Isn't it true that we kind of get confused when we talk about, that's that church over there, and we immediately talk about a structure? Well, there's a person today that wrote the book of Hebrews. We don't know who it was. It could have been Paul, but we're not sure. And the book of Hebrews is a book about the Hebrew people. And it's around 10 chapters long, and what it entails is it tells the story of God's people. And it tells the story of a group of people that knows God's laws. And I kind of hearken it to us in here. There's a whole lot of us that know the difference between right and wrong. We know not to murder. We know not to lie. We know all those things. And some of those things we fall in and we slip up, and some of those we avoid. But it's as if we know a lot of the do's and don'ts. And so this writer is saying, hey, I know where you're at, and let me remind you of who you are. There's a big God who loves you, who gave you this moral compass and code, and you're trying to follow it, but life happens. And so then he continues on, and in chapter 10, he's going to say, hey, I see that you're starting to fracture. I see that you're starting to fall away. And I want to warn you and encourage you on how you can make sure that you fine-tune your faith to continue strong. So we're going to dive into that today as we go in. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. There are 4 points that I'm going to give you today for our type A's, so get ready. Here we go. It says this, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. So that's pretty easy, right? The writer says, hey, I want to remind you of something that we are to encourage one another towards love and good deeds. However, if you know the original language, it's different. See, the original language actually says something different. It's not encourage you towards something. Do you know what that word spur actually means? It means let's irritate one another. So when you think of it like that, hey, the writer writes to us and says, hey, you need to be an irritation to the person next to you to good deeds. How many of you have someone that you irritate sitting next to you? How many of you are married? Oh, I didn't say that loud. I didn't think it was. But you know what it's like to irritate. I mean, when you're married, when you first get married, the first 6 months, oh, Pookie Bear, you love it. Oh, you're so cute. I love when you do that. After 20 years, I'm so sick and tired of it. It's just irritating. And so if you're in this room, the writer is telling all of us that we need to learn to be irritable. Some of you are like, I got that down. I am irritable. But it's different. So that first point, be irritable, actually means something different. And let me kind of share. The writer is trying to encourage us that the church is not brick and mortar, that faith is not necessarily about a structure or a statue, that faith is actually about people. I was just in a meeting this past week, and we talked about the idea of the next campus for the ABLE initiative, and we talked about that structure and that idea. And one of the things I made very clear is we care less about the structure than we do about what happens within it. So let me give you some encouragement. We are to irritate one another towards good deeds. So how many of you, when you get up on Sunday morning and you're driving to church, you say to yourself, I know the person I'm going to irritate today? Because that's what the writer is saying. He's saying that as we gather together, that we should know the person we're to irritate. In other words, when the church moves from a what to a who, our faith radically changes. When church moves from what to who, our faith changes. So a practical question that I ask our staff all the time is, as we drive in early in the morning, is this: who are you going to church for today? Now, when was the last time you asked yourself that question? Here's why the writer was writing it. Because he knew that there would be some individuals who are sitting in the room who don't have a lot of people that they irritate. And he's saying, you don't know any of these people to irritate, and so you're not going to church for anyone today, which means that you're going to a structure. And if you're going to the structure, that's going to last a short amount of time, and you're going to fall away. Because life is hard. There's a lot of persecution out there. Culture is going to distract you. And so if you don't have someone that you irritate and irritates you, you're probably not going to go very long. Now, some of you are like, case in point, like, well, so what does it mean to irritate? Let me kind of illustrate this a little way. I travel a lot and go around the country every year, and so I fly a lot. And I got to be honest, flying is a miserable experience for the people who are with me. It's because I am a neurotic when it comes to flying. Just ask my wife. And so what happens is I'm the guy who has to get there early. I have to make sure that I'm there. I'm not sweating. I'm not running through the airport. I just want to make sure. But something that irritates me to no other is when I get to the area and the lady who is at the counter says, in just a few moments, we're going to begin our boarding process. Right off the bat, I'm irritated. Because here's what happens in that boarding process. What's supposed to happen is every one of us are assigned a zone. And you know your zone. And if everybody honored the zone, there would be no irritation. We could sit in peace and we could love it. In fact, the person actually alludes to it. They say, and until your zone is called, please remain seated in the boarding area. And do you know what happens, which really irritates me, is as soon as that person says that, I look across and I see someone who just automatically steps up and starts inching toward the boarding area. And it irritates me because you have to understand this. I'm a very competitive person at times, especially when it comes to boarding. And I know a thing or two about flying. Do you know this? Do you know that you can tell like what zone a person is supposed to board by glancing at their phone? It's different colors. So if you're in first class, your zone, if you're Delta, your zone is pink. Like you have the pink screen. And so I know off the bat when I'm sitting there and they go ahead and call, we're going to board by zones and we're going to have individuals that come up. And I know if you're in first class. And so like if you're about ready to know and you stand up, I have respect for you. I respect you. That's awesome. It's great. There's no irritation. But here's what happens. The person gets up and says, okay, we're going to begin our boarding with those that need a little extra time. And then what happens is I see like 5 different people running to the zone because they need extra time. Are you kidding me? There's no limp. There's no affirmity. You don't need extra time. You can throw your bag up there really quick, and I am irritated. So what happens is when I see people like that, they're cheating the system, and so then I have to stand for something, right? So I stand up and I start inching myself toward it, even though I'm not in that zone. Now, I won't do that. I won't board. Now, they get to the next one is they honor our military. And for that, everybody just stands back and says, thank you, sir. Thank you. We respect that. Okay, military. But then they go this. They say to young families, and I've been there. Look, I drag the car seats. I did it all the time. But airlines have changed. And what they've said is, hey, if you have young children, you're going to board after zone 2. And they say that. So the next zone to board is a first class zone. And so I'm standing there, and all of a sudden they said, okay, for those that need a little time and assistance, and all of a sudden we get like 5 families with 7 kids and a bunch of stuff. They start walking toward the door. Now I'm sitting there going, did you not hear the lady? She said that you're not supposed to board for 2 more zones. And then what happens is all the other people get annoyed and irritated, and then they stand up and they start inching toward the boarding zone. So now all chaos has ensued. And what happens is the zone structure has been eliminated. It's a free-for-all, which means that because of this, I am irritated to the point that I'm irritated to action, that I'm just going to have to board because they're boarding. They have a blue sticker on their boarding zone. That is zone 7, lady, okay? Please. So I have to get on that plane. As you can tell, I have problems. But isn't it true that how we interact with one another can irritate one another to do certain things? This is what the writer was talking about. Because they say, do you know someone well enough to where you're able to irritate them to love and good deeds? Some of us, we go to church all the time and we don't know anybody like that. Some of us, we sit in here and we come each week, and I thank God for it. But we don't take the next turn of the dial and we don't engage with someone that's going to irritate us to grow in our faith. And that's what the writer's talking about. So here are 3 specific ways that we can begin this process when it comes to be irritable. You ready? Here's the first one. We need to irritate predictably. So who are you showing up for each week? And some of you are like, well, Terry, I don't have anybody. Well, that might be the first problem. You need to be irritable in the hallways. You need to look at what someone's wearing and you say, hey, that is a beautiful top. I just want to tell you that, and I want to encourage you in that. Or, hey, I watched you for the last 2 weeks serving. I just want to tell you, you do an amazing job. Sometimes we have to irritate someone in that process and step out of our comfort zone. We need to be predictable. We need to come each week. Let me tell you why that's important. If you've ever volunteered in the infant room, and if you have an infant, you know how important each other is. You know how important it is because you're driving to church with your baby and you want to be able to drop the baby off, and you are just praying that the same person is there to receive your baby. Because you know it is heartbreaking when you hand over your infant and your infant is screaming at the top of their lungs because you're handing them to a stranger. That when that baby understands and knows that person on a consistent basis and it's easier to do the handoff, you relax and you rest and you're able to focus and you're able to worship. But when there's not consistency, when they're not predictable, then it's difficult on you. And if you're a volunteer, you know this. You know how important it is to be there week in and week out to receive those children so that way they have a friendly face. So we need to learn to irritate one another predictably. There's a second point. We need to irritate mentally. Who are you investing in? Who are you asking questions to? I tell our staff all the time, who are you going to church for today? And who are you looking for behind their eyes? And what I mean by that is, isn't it true that we're moving from point A to point B, that we've forgotten why we're here? How many of you at churches become, hey, I got to go to church. We're going to start at this time. They say it's an hour. The pastor better hurry up and quit gabbing and get over with so we can get out of here. Well, then we've forgotten the whole purpose of why we're here, right? And so when we come into the hallway and when we see someone that maybe we've built and irritated for a little bit, and we look behind their eyes, we see that they don't look the same as they did the weeks before. And then we ask the question and say, how are you doing today? How can I pray for you today? And then they break down in tears because you notice something's going on in their life. Do you understand now why the writer says we need to irritate one another? You need to be there. You need to rub shoulders with one another. So that way you have the privilege to ask those kind of questions. So be mentally present each and every week. Here's the third part. We need to be irritable randomly. What do you mean by that? I just did it last service. I was talking to someone and someone said someone's mother was struggling, and right away, 5 minutes later, I pulled out my phone and I sent a text message to the individual to irritate them and to say, hey, I just heard that your mother's there. I just wanted to encourage you and let you know I just paused and I prayed for you today. That's what the writer's talking about. That's what it means to have community and to have faith. So, predictably, mentally, randomly, we need to learn how to irritate one another to love and good deeds. We go to the second point, continuing on. The next verse says this, now, spur one another on to love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. In other words, the writer says, look, continue striving toward that chair. Live in the tension. Don't fall in the habit of falling away from your consistency. Don't sit in the comfy chair. Don't fall away from your faith. Live in the tension every day. Work hard to fine-tune your faith. And then it says, but be encouraging to one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So here's the second point. The second point is we need to learn to be available. Now, Terry, what do you mean by be available? Well, it's very simple. There are many of us in here that we come here, and guys, that's the next screen. We come here, and as we sit together, we think that as the writer's writing, he's writing to everyone right now as they are. He's not. Do you understand that the early church was small groups of people? The early church was groups of people that could irritate one another and know each other by name. That was the early church in many of these churches. So when the writer is writing to the Hebrews, he's talking to small groups of people. I've said here in our church, do you know that your faith was never meant to be lived out alone? It was always meant to be lived out in the context of community. And community is not this. Because I could look over here and say, do you know everybody in this room? And you'd be like, I don't know anybody. Community is when you're in a smaller group of individuals that you do life together. You pray for one another. You encourage one another. You share with one another. That's what the author is meaning. So if you're in this room and you don't have a group, you don't have a small group of people that irritate you and you irritate them. Some of you are like, I got that group. No. Irritate you to faith in action. If you don't have that, then let me give you some advice, all right? Here are 3 things. You need to be available, and here's how you can be available. You need to be purposeful. If you don't have a group, you need to find a group. It's not going to find you. Now, some of you are like, well, Pastor Terry, you just stand up here and preach. Why do you know what I'm doing at 4:30 today? I'm going to be with my people. I'm going to meet with my group. And they irritate me, let me tell you. But I irritate them. Do you know what we do? We pray for one another. We laugh with one another. We encourage one another. We challenge one another. And I'll be honest with you, it's Sunday. I'm exhausted after the day. And so when I get to that point, I'm like, oh, I'm so tired. I want to nap. I want to go to sleep. But you know what? I have to be purposeful about community. I can't just let it happen because something will always get in the way, and I'll always want to sit in that comfy chair. That nap on a cloudy day feels really good, and I'll want to sit in that chair. But you know what? If you're purposeful, you fight to love people enough to be irritable with. And so here's what you need to do. You need to aim small and miss small. In other words, if you don't have a group, then you need to find a group. Some of you are like, well, Terry, I don't have a group. Well, you can inquire at the welcome desk. We have groups all around on Sunday mornings as well as around Myrtle Beach. But here's one thing I would tell you. It's easy to form a group. There are several of you that you have 2 or 3 couples that you know. Just look at each other and say, hey, let's irritate the heck out of each other. And join together. And do life together and challenge one another. I tell our group all the time, look, I want this to be a blessing and not a burden for you. Because I know that, you know what, we're going to find joy within the tension. So be purposeful. Here's the second thing. Be patient with it. Respect the process. Look, some of you don't have a group because you tried a group one time and there was that person that wouldn't, I was going to say a word, but I won't. They wouldn't be quiet. And we've all been a part of those groups, right, where someone doesn't have self-awareness and they just talk and talk and talk, kind of like the pastor does on Sunday mornings. And when that happens, we just say, I'm not going to go be a part of this group again. I give up on that. But what I would tell you is that, you know what, don't allow that to push you away from community. Respect the process. And what respect the process means is this. You're going to have different people at different stages in every group. You're going to have some people who are just like you, and you're going to have some people that don't know a lick. And I love it when we have individuals that they're at a different level and they ask the most amazing questions. And I love that. And I love engaging them. And I love pouring into them. And you know what? They pour into me because they'll ask a question to where I'm convicted. They'll say, shouldn't we be doing this? Oh, yeah, we should. I don't do a really good job on that. And then all of a sudden, I am spurred to love and good deeds. And so we need to be patient with the process. And we need to remember the third principle, which is really easy. We need to fight for one another's hearts. How many of you have kids and you fight for their heart every day? Well, the writer is saying to each of us that we need to spur one another and not neglect meeting one another. Fight for one another. Because culture in this world is difficult. And when everyone here says, you know what, I want to follow Jesus, I want to fine-tune my faith, and we need to latch arms and smaller groups, and we need to encourage one another to take a step and turn the dial. You see, sometimes I think we get friendship wrong when the truth is a friend is not a prize to be won, but a person to be loved. We see our kids fight for the affection and the attention of friends as a prize. Oh, they like me. Oh, they like me. Oh, they gave me attention. And it's a prize. It gives them security. But that's not what it means to be a friend. A friend is someone that you love even when they're unlovable. How many of you have someone that is unlovable and you still love them? Don't look next to you. Don't do it. Don't do it. We'll be good. Okay? So be available. All right? Be irritable. We go to the third point. And it's that verse again, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. Number 3, be encouraging. Be encouraging. If I were to ask you a question, for those of you that are Christians in the room, watching online in the balcony, when you think back to when you said yes to Jesus, is there a person that is attached to that moment? In other words, who is the person that introduced you to Jesus? And I want you to think of that person. Ready? Because it's important. Because there's a faith principle with it. Because if I were to ask you this question or this statement, the best way to know God is to know someone who, what would you fill in the blank? So the best way to know God is to know someone who. What would you say after that? Some of you already know the answer. But here's the principle. We come to church and we want to grow our faith, but some of us, we say the best way to know God is to know someone who acts differently in private than in public. Wait till I say it, guys. Some of us in this room, we say the best way to know God is to know someone that speaks differently to your face than behind your back. Some of us say the best way to know God is to know someone who lives differently on Monday to Saturday than on Sundays. And why do I say it like that? Because how many of us surround ourselves week in and week out with those types of individuals? And you know what? I'm not downplaying them. They are messy just like me. But in other words, are we surrounding ourselves with a group of individuals who are going to encourage us towards those things? Or are we going to stand and say the best way to know God is to know someone who knows God? The best way to know God is to know someone who knows God. And if we say that that's true, then you show me your friends or you show me your group and I'll show you who you are and where you're at today. If you show me the group of individuals that you hang out with and irritate every single week, I'll show you where your faith is today. Because if your group of friends don't encourage you, don't irritate you to love and good deeds, don't challenge you, then your faith is probably sitting at the level that they're at. In other words, the writer says to us, prioritize your faith. It's time to stop sitting in the comfy chair. How many remember the high school days? Do you remember this? Do you remember what the most important thing walking out to the parking lot was if you were driving with a group of friends? Do you remember what the most important thing as you're heading toward the car? What was the most important thing that you needed to do if you were walking towards the car with a group of friends? You were going to yell something. What was it? Shotgun. Do you remember that coming out of the car? You'd walk out, shotgun! You were like, yes, got it. Yes, I beat you. Yes, yes, yes. Can I ask a question? Why was that so important? Like, when was the last time, if you're like my age at, 27, if you're my age, why are you laughing? This is wrong. But if you're my age, if you were to ask me, like, why don't I yell shotgun anymore when I walk out of the car? We don't do that anymore, do we? Some of you are like, it doesn't matter. I just tell my kids, get in the back. I get you. But do you remember how important that was and how much fun you had and you just yelled it up top, yeah, shotgun. And why? It's because you had a blonde hair, blue-eyed blonde sitting in the driver's seat that you wanted to sit next to, and so that was really, really important. Or you didn't want to sit in the back seat because it was smelly and dirty and everything else, and it was just a rough ride in the back and you just didn't want to deal with it. So you wanted to be in the seat. You wanted to be in the captain's chair. That's where you wanted to be. Well, here's the point. You should strive to allow your faith to sit shotgun with you at all times. How many of you are driving around town and your faith is right there next to you? In other words, you never allow your faith to take a back seat to anything. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes we pastors, we're really good at just making people feel really convicted about don't ever let your faith take a back seat to anything. Here's what I mean by that. You will allow your faith to take a back seat to things. You will do that. You will fall into it. You will sit in that comfy chair. What I'm telling you is expect it, and when you feel it, you need to make a fine tune. You need to get out of that comfy chair, and you need to make sure you put your faith back in that prioritization part. Does that make sense? Now, some of you say, well, Terry, how do I do that? Here's how we do this. We have 4 faith principles that we encourage our kids and our adults to make sure are a part of our lives. So if you're saying, I'm sitting in the comfy chair and I don't have a group and I need to be encouraged, but I'm afraid to go into a group because they're going to look at me and they're going to know that I don't really just work on my faith. Well, let me give you 4 principles that are really easy to remember. You ready? Here they are. First one is hear. Hear from God through His Word. It means you have to start owning your faith. It means that you have to start opening God's Word. Yes, I know. I had conversations with 3 people today because we are all reading through the Bible and we're learning and owning our faith. And if you want to join that journey, it's really simple. We can help you with that. But we just entered this week into the book of Leviticus. And Leviticus will kick you out of a 1-year reading, let me just tell you, okay? Leviticus is rough. But the more you stay in it, the more you learn, the more you're affected, the more you grow. But here's the powerful thing. When you're reading, God, what are you speaking to me today? That's the point. Is hear God through His Word. Just pause, meditate. It could be one scripture. A friend of mine once said, you know what, sometimes we focus on getting through chunk by chunk the Bible, which is important to do, but sometimes you just need a verse. Sometimes you just need to stop and you just say, God, what are you speaking to me through this? So hear God through His Word. The second thing we learn to do is we need to pray to God continually. And if you don't pray and you struggle with praying, let me give you a word of advice. When you leave the parking lot and you're driving, say this. All right, God, I'm talking. Pastor said, talk, I'm talking. God, I haven't talked to you in a long time. But God, I just want to fine-tune my faith, and I'm listening. That's all you have to say. Be careful, though. When you tell God you're listening, you'd be amazed what hits your mind and your heart. You want to talk about conviction. You want to talk about challenge. You want to talk about pray. You want to talk about you need to irritate. You won't, I was going to say something, but I won't say it this way. You won't allow God to be quiet because He's going to be talking and flooding you with so much if you say you're listening. And it's wonderful. So there's hear, there's pray, there's talk to others about Him intentionally. Who are you surrounding yourself with that you're going to intentionally talk about your faith? You got to talk about your faith. And not about a point, but about a dash. And here's the beauty of it. Some of you are like, I can't talk about my faith. Yes, you can. Because I can talk about how I succeed in my faith, and boy, I can talk a whole lot more about how I fail in my faith. Because I fail a lot. So there's a whole lot to talk about. We have to learn to talk about our faith. Last but not least, we have to live an authentic spiritual life. Authenticity is thrown out a lot, but authentic doesn't mean perfect. Authentic means messy. What authentic means is that you admit you have mess, you admit you've been sitting in the comfy chair, and you admit that you need help to fine-tune your faith. That's authenticity. I love when we were starting our group, I love through the years, people have said, Pastor Terry, we want to do this. We don't know if we can commit to every week. And I go, not a problem. Because it's not about being perfect. It's about having your hand on the dial and engaging and staying committed to the process. We end with this. The author says, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Do you know what is amazing? So if you listen for 2 more minutes, the author looked at a group of people, most of them were Jewish Christians, and he describes who they are. He reminds them of the God who gave them the 10 Commandments. And if he was looking at you, he would remind you of your moral compass. Do you know that our country's moral and judicial code is written based on the 10 Commandments? Did you know that? So we are living according to the commandments that God put down and says, isn't it awesome? But then he takes it a step further. He says, but you are following Jesus. And I want to remind you of who Jesus is. Do you know that Jesus existed before the law? Do you know that Jesus Christ fulfilled the law? Do you know that Jesus Christ died and took your sin? And do you know that he is beginning and end, and he is going to reign forever? In other words, don't fall away and just follow a bunch of laws. Be fulfilled by following Jesus because he embodies all of it. And the point that he's saying is there is a day that is coming. And that day is going to be a day of judgment. And it's not a day that should scare us. It's a day that should excite us. Because that day of judgment is this. Jesus came and said, I don't want you to die, so I'm dying for you. Do you want that? And if you look at Jesus and says, yes, I want that. I will follow you. Please pay the penalty and take my sin. If you do that, then that day of judgment, it's amazing. But what he's saying is, why give up on your faith as the day approaches? You've got him. Follow him. Live your faith for him. You know, I love my wife because one of the things she does when I'm at the airport, she irritates me, but in a good way. While I get irritated by all the people cheating the zone system, you know what my wife does? She follows about 2 people behind me. And meanwhile, I'm playing the game of, all right, you're going to move 2 steps, I'm going to move 2 steps. I'm going to beat you to the gate because you're behind me and you're trying to cheat the system, and I'm going to beat you because I got to get on the plane. And my wife is just shaking her head behind me going, Terry, moron. That's, you know, she didn't say that, but that's what I feel like. Do you know what she does? It's as if she follows 2 people behind, as if to look at me and go, I'm going to be here. You can board the plane if you'd like. See how that works out for you. And it's irritating. But it's irritating in a good way because guess what I have to do? Your person's getting ahead of me. And then we walk on. That's okay. When I go down the aisle, I give him an elbow when I walk past. No, I don't do that. But the writer says, irritate one another. Follow the God of the universe. Be active. And that's our last point. Be active in your faith. So that way you can truly, truly live in the tension that God has us in. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for this message. Thank you, Father, for your grace, your mercy. God, I pray for every person in this room that doesn't have a group to irritate. God, I pray one of 2 things. I pray that they would be purposeful in finding a group, and God, as a church, we want to help with that. Or God, I pray that they would lock arms with 3 or 4 friends that are wanting the same thing, and they would form their own group to irritate one another, to spur one another on to love and to good deeds. God, thank you for this illustration and the writer of Hebrews and how they illustrate this, God, to us. And Lord, we pray that we'd not only be irritating to one another, but God, may our irritation rub off on others outside this place so that they know the amazing God that we serve. So we love you and we bless you. In your precious name we pray. Amen. May God bless you.